Welcome to the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, also streaming on expertcresecrets.com, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy, and using a proven tax deferral strategy, such as the Deferred Sales Trust, is the best way for you to grow your wealth and exit highly appreciated cryptocurrency, businesses, primary homes, investment real estate, save a failed 1031 exchange, so you can create and preserve more wealth. Hey, I'm your host, Brett Swarts. In each episode, I'm joined by some of the best real estate, financial wealth minds in the world, where they share their ideas, deal stories, and inspiration. So together we can make complex tax deferral strategies simple and passive income plans achievable. I'm also joined sometimes by guests who help to make complex, fundamental issues facing our world more simple and ways to solve that. And we're going to be talking about the issues with the affordable housing crisis. And I'm excited about our next guest because he is an expert in this. He's a seasoned entrepreneur with a deep understanding of housing, real estate, and construction. And he's always seeking ways to improve neighborhood schools or governments. He's now in Georgia, and he has an amazing company that's we're going to be talking about. But we're first going to dive in to all things housing crisis. Please welcome to the show with me, Atticus Leblanc. Atticus, how you doing?
Doing great. Appreciate it, Brett. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, your name might be the coolest name for anyone who's been on the show so far. Maybe talk about that more in the future, later in this episode. But in the meantime, would you give our listeners a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Yeah. So been in real estate here in the Atlanta area for about the last 20 years, and been in housing for the last really 14 years of that. Started my career in commercial real estate, doing site selection acquisition for some major developers around the country, and then pivoted to residential construction and acquisition, rehab, renovations, and rentals. Starting in 2008 in the financial crisis, have owned and managed about 550 affordable rentals, pretty much run the gamut across different affordable housing programs, and really seen it from the front row and from a pretty high level. So it's been a wild ride, and thankfully now more life.
Excellent. And we're going to dive into, again, the fundamental issues of affordable housing crisis here in a minute. And but before we go there, I want to take one other step back. Help our listeners get to know you a little bit better, and also myself. So I believe we've all been given certain gifts, and these gifts have been given to us to be a blessing and help to others. Some people call them superpowers. Some people call them strengths. I'm curious, what are those one or two gifts that you believe you were given, and how does it help how you help and bless people today?
Yeah, so for me, it's definitely creative problem solving. I think I've historically had a unique ability to assess problems from multiple angles and figure out solutions that a lot of people either haven't thought of, or maybe just are really outside the realm of accepted practice. To be able to address those head on in a new way.
Absolutely love that. And I think that's perfect why you're probably in the space. And by the way, you can learn more about Atticus Leblanc and what he does at padsplit.com. That's padsplit.com. So Atticus, let's dive into the first part of the biggest challenge, or the biggest thing to try to understand when it comes to the housing crisis. Maybe you can define it in your words, right? And how you see it, and perhaps how people aren't seeing it today and how you're seeing it. And then let's talk about some solutions after that, okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so really two major problems that folks need to be aware of. One, I'm sure if anyone's been paying attention to the news, they've seen we have a massive supply problem. And so this boils down to basic economic fundamentals, supply and demand. And for the last 12 years, we really just haven't producing nearly enough supply of housing to be able to maintain affordability in any sense of the word. The second problem, which is equally as significant but much lesser understood, is access. And as we look at how housing providers mitigate risk through qualifying criteria such as minimum incomes at 3 times the monthly rent, minimum credit scores, minimum deposits, all of these things ultimately create barriers to access. And it's at a point now where there's a huge portion of the population, really you look at anybody earning less than $40,000 a year, simply cannot qualify for the many apartments or most of the traditional housing options in their areas. So it means that the people who are serving our communities, literally, and working there cannot afford those traditional housing options.
Got it. So the first one is just supply. That's pretty obvious, right? We're just too much demand, not enough supply being created. And that's a challenge, and we can maybe dig into some of those ways to solve that. The second one being just access, that it's difficult for people to even qualify for even to rent the rent, or of course a house, right? Because of 3 times the monthly rent typical minimum requirement and the minimum credit score. So if you're making less than $40,000 a year, good luck getting qualified. Is that a fair summary so far?
Exactly right.
Excellent. So let's dive into the first one, right? So obviously we don't have enough supply. I live in California, you're in Georgia, but this is across the nation, right? We're challenged. Different areas are better or ahead than most. But if we just focus on 2 things that if they were to change in your mind, what would they be for the supply side? And you could talk about the government side, you could talk about the developer side, right? What would those 2 things be?
Zoning and trust. So from our standpoint, if you look at the housing supply that we've created over the last 60 years, there's just a huge mismatch in terms of the housing supply that exists relative to the demography that we see today. And what I mean by that is you've had single family homes has been far and away the predominant source of supply for the last 60 years. Meanwhile, we've seen family sizes that have declined precipitously, and far and away, if you look at the makeup of households across the U.S. today, it's around 73% are single adults or couples, no kids whatsoever. And yet, if you look at the supply of studio or 1-bedroom units, those are 12.5% of the existing housing stock. So huge mismatch there. And consistently, those single-family homes have been getting larger and larger, basically tripling in size if you look back to 1960. And it leaves a lot of room and existing space, and really means that a lot of supply that we need is already there. Folks just don't trust that they can split up their house and share it with someone else in their community. In the same way that it may have been really commonplace if we talk to our grandparents or great grandparents to rent rooms in people's houses. That was a thing that absolutely happened not that long ago, and today it's totally not.
Let me make sure I capture that, because I think that's really key to the fundamentals of these stats here. So 73% of all housing right now that are being occupied, and correct me if I'm wrong, is by single couples, no kids. Is that correct on the first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you look at the U.S. population in terms of households, 73% of those households are either single adults living alone, single adults sharing with each other, or couples. That's it.
Wow, got it. And then of the actual housing units, the unit mix, whether it be studios, 1s, 2s, 3s, 4 bedrooms, right, townhomes, all these different mixes, only 12% are actually studio 1 bedrooms, right? Which it's like reverse. It's almost like 73. Let's just say 73% could be if there were studios and 1s. Perhaps we could solve that. Is that a fair summary so far?
Yeah. I mean, the major distinction is what's built is built, right? It doesn't really make sense to just go tear it down and start new. But it's not that difficult. And where we come in from a technology solution is to make it feasible and to build the trust and accountability that encourages folks to share that existing space that's already out there. And you look at
very cool. So it's basically like the Uber for housing. Is that a fair summary so far?
Yeah, very, very similar. I mean, the analogy I provide is Uber versus hitchhiking. What's the difference? The answer is really nothing, except that because you have this app on your phone, you trust that you can go get in the back of the car with that person. And ultimately, we're trying to do the same thing for housing.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute here too. By the way, that's padsplit.com if you want to go right now, because I'm already excited about this, just getting into this. And by the way, I'm meeting Atticus Leblanc for the first time about 5 minutes ago. So So that's the first thing, right? So the zoning, right? So if they could change the zoning or encourage developers, because, and let's face it, on the development side, right? They're saying, look, if I'm going to go build something, I need to get the highest bang for my dollar and for my time and my energy to build these bigger units to get higher rents. So from their perspective, of they're saying the environmental, the permitting, the time and energy it takes to do this, to build a studio. If I could just build, a 3-bedroom, and it may not take that much more cost or time and energy, and I get much better profit. So let's talk about it from their angle. Like, you can't blame the contractors for building what they can actually make money on, correct?
Sure. No, not at all. And if anything, I would encourage the alignment of incentives. The real question is, you have existing zoning codes that prevent that same developer from building if it's a 3,000 square foot house that's in his buy or build box. There's really no existing zoning policy across the board that allows him to build that same 3,000 square foot box and build it for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, right? He's only allowed to build it for one family. And if there were a way to demonstrate to that same developer that it were more profitable, and it's certainly easy to do, to build micro units or shared housing that would be more profitable, he would go do that. But zoning laws, as they exist today in most jurisdictions, preclude him from doing so, and really prevent that free market type of action.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to take one other side of it too, right? So that's the people that say, "Hey, look, we need more prisons to take care of, or to house to make sure that we not keeping the bad guys on the streets, right?" But they say, just don't build it by my house, right? So now let's take that same part of the argument. They say, okay, that sounds great, Atticus, but just don't build out in my city, right, or my backyard, right? Go do that somewhere else. Talk to me about that dynamic that's going on, if there is one.
Yeah, well, no, it's clearly an issue, and I think, listen, everyone's comfortable with the status quo by and large, and anything that is a disruption to the status quo that is treated with fear and anxiety and usually opposition. And this is not really any different. And the biggest opposition that we see to shared housing is for folks who are living in single family neighborhoods who think that this is going to change everything. And the only thing that's going to disprove a lot of those impressions or those fears is when it actually exists. But at the same time, you can look back at some of the most famous historic neighborhoods in America, and they are multidimensional by every stretch of the imagination. And you often have a huge diversity and variety of housing types that create healthier communities over the long term. The bigger and more pragmatic question from our standpoint is, okay, well, if you're living in a really nice neighborhood, do you value the services around you? How about the grocery store, or the Amazon delivery guy who comes to your door, or the person who serves you your morning coffee? Or even the person who teaches your kids, or shows up to the 911 call, because the reality is more and more cities are not able to house these people anywhere close to those places of work. And you're starting to see some of the challenges now post-pandemic, where everyone is hiring, no one can find enough people to employ and keep those jobs filled. So the wait at the restaurant gets to be an hour or longer than it was pre-pandemic. Because guess what? The housing costs have increased so much that those people can no longer afford to live in those areas for those wages. And who ends up paying the price for that? And ultimately, it's all of our best interest to have the people who are serving our community have at least the opportunity.
Yeah, I could agree with you more. In fact, in Lake Tahoe, where I'm here in Northern California, they are talking, or are about to, basically just limit the amount of Airbnb permits, right? Because what's happening is they're seeing that all of the housing is going to all the vacationers, and then they're saying all of the locals are like, hey, we can't even afford, or there's not even available. The supply is so limited, and that means the rents are so high that we can't afford to work and live here at the same place. And so it's a huge crisis. This is why we're in the fundamental issues of the affordable housing crisis. We're talking with Atticus Leblanc, and you can learn more about him at patsplit.com. So now let's talk about the government's role, right? And what, besides zoning, but I'm from a commercial real estate background, started at Marcus and Millichap, grew up in the real estate industry with my dad, building custom homes, room additions in Fremont. He said 30 years ago, Brett, building in California was wonderful. They welcomed it. It was business friendly, right? We could do things in a way that, was quick and got things done. He goes, Brett, I would never want to start my career and ever build again in California. Part of why he kind of retired early too. He loved to build houses. He loved to, own rentals, but it's just become such a nightmare to do this in California. So talk about it from that perspective. Like what can they actually do that they're not doing, right? I mean, could they, maybe California, if you're following that at all, and that pertains to it, but what are some things that good states are doing to get out of the way, to get developers and get housing that can be built quickly?
Sure. Yeah. So, and I mean, from a policy zoning perspective, I mean, we've seen some recent advances in California as maybe the poster child of that, of trying to remove some of those restrictions and the acknowledgement that that a lot of this intervention has really created a significant amount of that supply crisis. And so I think the biggest thing that they can do, and you hit the nail on the head, is to just let the people who are closest to the problem go figure out a way to solve it. And if your dad, as an example, builders want to build, at least unless you make it really, really difficult for them. And everyone is in business trying to maximize their gain and minimize their risk to whatever extent possible. And the more complex that you make these processes, whether it's zoning and development and pre-development and historic review, or if it's just as simple as, hey, how efficient is the building process and the permit process? And how easy is it for me to build? Because if we all acknowledge that this is a supply and demand problem, then we need to rapidly increase the supply and the ability of that supply to reach market as much as possible. And so the biggest thing that I think government can do is just streamline a lot of their own organizations and hold themselves accountable for making sure that they are processing the highest number of permits that they ever have in order to meet the demand, which is visible anytime you drive through an underpass and you see the folks who are often living on the streets that in a lot of cases are still full-time employed.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just the cost of it too, right? I mean, even the affordable housing, I've heard estimates of $250,000 to $325,000 per unit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. To build affordable housing, and you're going, how are you going to make sense of those numbers, right? For rents and return, because of just the sheer cost and the carrying cost and everything else that's associated with it. So yeah, streamline and accountability, right, for government. Sometimes it's just, especially in California, it seems like it's you throw our hands up. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just such a mess on so many levels. And it's so frustrating growing up here and seeing all of this happen. And you just go, man, you just pray for a miracle that something changes, but it doesn't. And just keeps getting worse. And more businesses are fleeing, right? More families are fleeing. I was talking to a good friend of mine. He's a realtor in Tennessee, and his name is Bill Zufall. And he's talking about how this last week, he had 5 new families that he has known, or 5 new individuals that are all moving out of California and are buying houses. There's just 5 more every week. There's like 2. He's just one realtor, right? And he's an awesome realtor with Keller Williams. He does great work, but he's just like, they just keep calling. But it's like on 2 a week. I just closed 5 this month. It's just, they're just fleeing out of California, going to places like Tennessee and Arizona and Texas and Florida and in the meantime, California seems to continue to crumble. So it's very sad. Okay, so now let's talk about some solutions. All right, now that we've it's enough about that before I get too depressed on all this stuff. So let's talk about padsplit.com and what you're doing there. Give us the vision and give us the practical solution for some of these challenges.
Sure. Yeah. So for us, it's all based around that alignment of incentives, and if we can make housing that is more affordable and increase that supply really quickly and really cost effectively, we think the best way to do that is by making it more profitable for those investors, developers, housing providers that are already in the business. And how do we mitigate their risk and essentially create a product that's more profitable than their other alternatives? Because if you can do that, then guess what? They're going to go create that product. And if that product happens to be affordable housing, that's the business that they're going to be in. The way that we do that is through a technology marketplace where we essentially handle all of the lead generation and screening, primarily for low-income workers earning less than $35,000 a year that wouldn't qualify for any other options. Get those people moved into rooms very quickly and create this shared living environment where we're setting contracts on each individual room and being able to capture a lot of the space that is completely unmonetized or wasted for those housing providers today. Formal dining room is a great case in point, as we talked very earlier about the just the size and the wasted space in a lot of those single family homes, but it's true in apartments as well. And a formal dining room never really generated any cash flow for any investor that I'm ever aware of. Well, now all of a sudden you can say, okay, well, I'll take that formal dining room, move out the dining room table and chairs, put in a bed, and maybe if you have to, put a door on the room, and now it nets $500 to $600 a month. And you can do that with pretty much any space that's suitable for conversion to living area, and your net profitability increases 3x.
Well, that's pretty cool. Okay, so picturing my mom, she lives, her two sons are older and grown, and they've got 4 bedrooms, and she's with my grandma, right? And so they're definitely using 2, but they've got like a side dining room there. They've got the other room there, right? And then they've got, like, let's say they use 2 for themselves, and then they have 2 more. So they could potentially do 4. So what you're saying is, and I don't know how much square footage on average you need, right, for this, but 4 times 500, that's an extra 2,000 a month. If they're willing to say, hey, we're going to be a shared space here, right? Now they're in an HOA, right? And they're in California, right? Gated community, nice community. So walk us through just the practicality or some of the challenges with that, or maybe it's not as bad as it was someone might think for some of those challenges.
Sure. Yeah. So 2 distinct use cases. I'd say the overwhelming majority of our clients today are investors and kind of traditional landlords who don't have that same personal interaction with those residents on a daily basis. We do have some, and actually I rent a downstairs room in my personal home and have for about the last 18 months to a pad split member. But those are less frequent, and I think will start to become more common after we have scaled and really demonstrated the fact that you can trust these folks in multiple use cases. But the easiest portion for us, or the easiest thing for us to do, is to show a landlord, hey, here's how you can actually increase your bottom line and really make it palatable. As you look at talking about an HOA and those types of issues, that's part of the zoning, right? And HOAs not specifically, but usually the definition of family is on a local level, whether it's county or city, and they'll often restrict how many people can live together. The Golden Girls, for instance, would be prohibited in a lot of different zoning jurisdictions, even though we can all look at this problem and say, yeah, this makes a ton of sense. And we have enough data within our 2,400 units to show that it's better for all parties, including the neighbors.
Very well said. Okay, so most of them are investors, and so let's take the study of. I had a rental house, and they actually have another rental house. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and they're renting it now, I think, for around $2,000, right? But it's 3 bedrooms, and it's to one family. It's not HOA. Right, it has plenty of parking, off street, non-metered, plenty of parking, and I don't even do like garage conversions too, right? They have a pretty big garage, perhaps could be converted as well. On average, what are you seeing on a per square footage basis? Of course, it depends on where you live, where you're at, right? But on average, on a per room, what's pad split usually seen for somebody?
Yeah. So again, the per square foot ranges are going to be totally different depending on where you are in the country. But historically, you're going to see a difference in your return on cost or your yield unlevered that's going to go up by 2x or more. And that's pretty much for shared housing versus taking a whole unit across the board. For us, we'll look at, if you have call it an 1,800 square foot house, you're generally looking at about 300 square feet total per bedroom, and that's inclusive of common areas and kitchens and bathrooms and that type of thing.
Cool. And if someone wants to get started, what are the next steps? And and I guess the other one would be, who is this not for?
Sure. Yeah. So where it doesn't really work is really small units or where your units are already super efficient. So if you have a 400 square foot studio or a multifamily complex to 400 square foot studios, it's going to be much less appealing, at least from the standpoint of being able to generate additional space that can produce revenue. But if you're talking about a 3-bedroom house or even a 2-bedroom apartment, generally it's going to be worth your while to at least look at renting by the room. And that's really what we enable and allow you to scale, because we're managing all of the different move-ins on flexible terms, as well as all of the different pay schedules. And we're usually billing by the week or tied to the pay period. So there's a fair amount of complexity on the back end.
Excellent. And what's the cost? How do you guys get paid? How does what's all the back end for paperwork or signing the leases and doing all of that?
So for us, we get paid as almost like a property manager. If you think about property management generally as the property maintenance on one half and the resident management on the other half, we handle pretty much everything under this resident management category, and we have service providers in market, and sometimes we'll do it ourselves on the property management itself. But we don't get paid unless that unit gets filled, and we just take a percentage of that rent as folks come in, and if they pay, then we get paid, and if they don't, then we don't. But all of the marketing and everything up front is on our dime. We do set base standards, though, to require that every room and home on our platform can meet our basic accountability standards.
Excellent. I'm talking with Atticus Leblanc, padsplit.com. That's padsplit.com. You can learn more about turning your house perhaps into a rental house or a primary house. Be able to rent your rooms, Airbnb-like, Uber-like, maybe kind of a hybrid of the two, but more on a niche level. Is that a fair summary, Atticus?
Yeah. No, I think both are certainly kind of shaping the shared economy, and we're certainly in that same space. I'd say if folks are curious, if you go through the For Hosts section on our website, there's actually a calculator where you can look at this use case and geography and figure out, okay, I think I have, like you were looking at your mom's house, I think I have this many other rooms that can be converted. What does that look like in terms of real dollars and how to compare it?
Oh, awesome. Love it. With that being said, we're running out of time. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I am.
All right. Knowing what you know now, if you go back to your 25-year-old self, what's the one golden nugget and make sure to tell yourself to do?
Start writing it down. Journaling every day. That's the biggest thing. I now that I'm getting older, I forget more than I'd like.
I'm with you, man. I get older, and I get every kid. I like my mind is filled up with more stuff. I forget, so it's a little bit of both.
I'm with you.
Second question: what's the number one book you've recommended or gifted the most in the past year?
Probably Atomic Habits would be the biggest recommendation, and just the necessity of building strong habits and repeating over and over, and how that ultimately helps you achieve your life goals longer term.
Love it. Third question: what are you most curious about right now?
Most curious about right now, I've gotten into mushroom foraging recently as a completely random thing, but yeah, that's probably top of my list these days.
Fantastic. Next question: what's your favorite leadership quote or theme that you strive to live by?
There's a great one that's if you have data, show me the data. But if we're going to use opinions, let's go with mine. That's probably the biggest. And certainly, I end up.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, in gray area where we can all sit around and argue our own opinions, but you've got to go with your gut in a lot of cases, and acknowledge that sometimes you just don't have the data to make an informed decision.
Absolutely love that. Last question. After all your success, helping the people you're helping, changing the industry, being a thought leader in affordable housing and actually making a difference, taking action, how do you stay centered in your values, and how do you stay encouraged to charge forward to reach new heights?
Biggest thing is set your North Star. Write down your vision, your core values, and understand a high-level strategy of how you're going to get there, but align your entire team. And certainly with your actions each day, and how does it relate to that long-term decisions that you're making on a daily basis? ultimately move you forward towards that North Star.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Atticus Leblanc, padsplit.com. You can find and learn more about what he's doing and how he's helping people and perhaps get the service going for you and your rentals. Atticus, I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to encourage you to keep using the gift you've been given in creative problem solving and looking at things from multiple angles and trying to bring all the parties together, right, to solve this housing crisis. It takes entrepreneurs like you to take action and to start something and to make movement. And I applaud you for what you're doing because it's the forefront of what this nation needs. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I also want to thank our listeners for listening to another episode of the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, also streaming on expertcresecrets.com, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy. Using a proven tax deferral strategy, such as the Deferred Sales Trust, is the best way to sell your business, real estate, cryptocurrency, primary home, all tax deferred, so you can create and preserve more wealth. And I want to encourage you to please share this episode with friends, family, government officials, developers, everyone. We need everyone helping with this crisis, right? It's not going to be solved by just one party. It's got to have everyone coming together to try to solve this. And so I appreciate everyone listening out there, and I